Good evening. It's a wonderful privilege to be here once again and share with you. Just looking around trying to figure out who was here yesterday and who wasn't, because I don't want to be redundant on any particular thing. But there may be a couple of points from yesterday that may bear repeating. It's been a really great time, and what's been really great too is spending time with Jeff and Ashita, who to me are just two incredible people, really great friends, love God, love people, and love you all, really do. Doing ministry isn't exactly the easiest thing on the planet, especially when you've been in it for a while. But nonetheless, it's something that not only you feel a call to do, but you can't help but love to do, even when it hurts. With that, I wanted to start, and I've been kind of praying because I wanted to not just give you some kind of great revelation, of some verse of scripture and do some Hebrew gymnastics or something like that with, flipping letters upside down and all that kind of thing that we do sometimes to talk about meanings of words. But I also wanted to kind of share tonight a bit, deposit something that maybe would not only encourage you, but as a body. And I want you to consider something. When Jesus said to Matthew in Luke 5:27, he said these words, "Follow me." And then later to Simon and Andrew, "Follow me and I will make you become fishers of men," in Mark 1:17. What I find interesting about this is that they didn't know anything about his virgin birth. They didn't know anything about a pending crucifixion, and most definitely couldn't fathom a resurrection. Yet in Matthew 19:27, Mark 10:28, Luke 5:28, and then 18:28, they all said these words, "See, we've left all and followed you." The reason why I'm saying this is because what is it about the person now of Jesus and what he shared that provoked people to leave all and follow without ever knowing anything about maybe the three essentials that every believer seems to focus on as the most important thing that Christ did? The miraculous birth, the hideous crucifixion, the defiance of death, if you will, resulting in the resurrection, which are absolutely three very important parts of our Christian thinking. But these guys didn't know that, and yet whatever was about him and whatever he was doing and saying seemed to be important enough to leave everything behind. May I suggest to you that is it possible, remotely possible anyway, that we've put such an emphasis on the virgin birth, the cross, and the resurrection, and the fact that we believe in those things, we've got those things, we've embraced those things, that in doing so, it's kind of like his life and his words have become secondary. That as long as I have those three boxes ticked off, at least, I'm good. But why would his life and the expression of it be important, or for that matter, even, if I may, more important than the virgin birth, the cross, and the resurrection? What? Think about it, because if it wasn't for this manifestation of life, they would have never want to crucify him. And if it wasn't for this manifestation of life, it wouldn't have defied the death of the cross and resurrected. Think about that for a minute. And the thing is, we find later on in the Gospels, and for that matter in the Apostle Paul's writing, is that same life that lived in him lives in you. So is it something about, do we need to tap into this thinking of what this life is, rather than simply believe in this Jesus life and tick off the boxes, if that makes sense? It's about this You are a manifestation of that life. And as we look at this, I think, consider this too. This life was so powerful. And in other words, there's a synonym for life in Christ. It's called love. And there's another one called light. Now, they may not sound like it's words that are actual synonyms, but the concept is his life is love, his love is life, and all of that is light. And you can flip it. His light is love. His light is life. The thing is, and I love the cross, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't love the cross. Actually, I've come to terms this year. I said it to our congregation. I said, you know what? We got to get this obsession of the cross out of our minds. You know how preachers always say things sometimes to startle the thinking, to get us think a little bit differently. But you do realize that we're the strangest people. I don't know if you've seen The Passion of the Christ. I did. I was totally moved by it, absolutely. But the thing that struck me is, okay, I got members of my church that went to see The Passion of the Christ. Basically, a guy be brutalized for 2 hours. Sometimes more than once they went to see it. But then they complain about a PG-13 movie that has a little bit too much violence. What's wrong with this picture? You're willing to watch God be brutalized, but you won't go to a PG-13 movie. That's PG-13 for us. I don't know what you call it out there, but it's not the banned R-rated or the type you shouldn't be going to. You can't bring a teenager to something like that type movie. We're just talking. It's too much violence. Yeah, but you sat through The Passion of the Christ 3 times. Yeah, because that was my Jesus. Think about it. Think about what you just said. And I say it that way for simply as this. Do you realize that whatever your theological bent may be, whatever put him on the cross was completely undone in the resurrection? Completely unraveled. And what unraveled it was simply this. You can't kill the love I have for you. You can try, but it won't die. And I got up from the grave to tell you it won't die. So what is it about this life? What is it about this expression, the word that would, again, cause people to leave their nets and fishing and their professions and their challenges to follow a guy? And mind you, again, they didn't know anything about a cross and couldn't fathom a resurrection yet. What was it about that life? Well, I find it interesting. In Luke chapter 19, and we're probably going to cover more of 19 than I anticipated tonight, but we'll see where it goes. In Luke 19, verses 5 through 10, it's following up on a fellow by the name of Zacchaeus that hears that Jesus is in town, and he runs up into a tree because he wants to see this Jesus. And he's in this tree. What's that? Oh, you were? From this message? Oh, did we talk about this before? Oh, no, okay. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. What is God saying tonight? Hope I'm on track. Okay. So Zacchaeus runs up to the tree, and Jesus is now, comes to this place. It says, Luke 19:5. We'll just pick it up reading, and I'm reading the English Standard Version because it said English, and I was in England, so I thought that was the thing to do. I guess I could have done King James, but I have my issues with King Jimmy sometimes. And when he came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry, come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they had saw it, they grumbled, saying, he's gone to be a guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, I give half of my goods, and I give to the poor. And if I defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which is lost. And the thing about this verse that I find interesting, first of all, is I always read the verse, just like I read it now, but somehow or another, as we do many times, is we kind of insert our own view into the verse. Like, for example, it's the idea that Jesus says, I'm going to come to your house, we're going to have dinner tonight together, and then he is so moved by this that he gives to the poor, and he restores back fourfold of things that he has taken from people. But that's not what the verse says at all. You mean he wasn't moved by Jesus and did that? Not at all. But that's what we've inserted sometimes in our minds. Maybe you didn't, but I have. First of all, it says, Zacchaeus, hurry, come down, I must stay at your house today. Here's again, this guy, Jesus, says this. Evidently, there's some fame about him, and it's like, oh my gosh, he wants to have dinner at my house. So he comes down joyfully, and isn't that interesting? How many times has it happened when you have an experience with Jesus joyfully, immediately what follows on the heels of this joyful experience is, quote, when they saw it, they all grumbled, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. So think that through. The guy's really happy. He's excited Jesus is coming to his house. He's thrilled he's going to have this encounter with Christ. And then the voices of condemnation occur. Has that ever happened to you? Have this great experience with God, and then there's on the heels of that is some kind of condemning voice. If it's not people around you, definitely that one in our heads. I'm not good enough. I'm a sinner. Oh my gosh, maybe. And the people are grumbling about this. The ESV says they all grumbled. He's gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. You see, as soon as this is said, it then says, Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. It wasn't because he encountered Jesus he's doing this. He was doing this to justify his life. Exodus 22:1, Proverbs 6:13. Most importantly, it's a fulfillment of the injunction of King David in 2 Samuel 12:6, where he talks about restoring, in David's case, sevenfold. So he's actually attempting to do the law to expiate his sin accusation and condition. So all of a sudden we have a religious moment where the voices of condemnation rise, and then the voices of self-justification rise on why I am okay, Jesus, because I do this, even though they're saying I do bad things. And Jesus responds interestingly, John Master Translation, I don't care about what you do with your riches, and I don't care what they're saying. Jesus' words were, today salvation has come to this house since he also is a son of Abraham. And I don't know why also is there. It really should be something like, since he is even a son of Abraham. Well, the point is this is not, I'm coming to your house to have dinner. And salvation has come today to you, not because you're a sinner, and not because you did all the correct legal things. It's because you have an identity as a son of Abraham. It's about who you are, not what you've done or don't do. The key is this has to become the prerequisite to anything we express. Notice that it just didn't say do. Anything we express has to come from the place of who we are, not whether or not we're keeping the rules properly. And I would suggest to you that rule keeping will hide your identity rather than reveal it. Thank you. Yay, I have a fan. The Hebrew word Zacchaeus, Zaki in Hebrew, it's Tzayin Kaf Yud, means to be pure. So what's interesting is the pure one is being accused of being a sinner, and because he feels the accusation, he needs to justify himself. But his true identity is pure one as son of Abraham. And Jesus is more interested in going right for who he is than for all the other stuff. Which is a real key here. Then he goes on to say, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. Or in other translations, that which is lost. Kai sozai to apololos. Literally, to save that which is destroyed. Lost sounds so nice, but it means destroyed. You see, if you think about it, here's a pure one. He may not see it because he's wrapped up in believing he's a sinner and everybody around him affirms it. His religious system affirms it. But in the end, he then feels he has to justify himself, at least to himself, let alone to God. But the actuality is that system is what was destroying his identity. And the system destroyed it. One of the specific aspects of the Abraham connection to God was that there was no concept of legal or moral sin. That's hard for us to swallow. But go back and read the entire book of Genesis. You'll find there's not one sin offering requested ever. Sin offering doesn't come into the picture till Moses shows up. And Moses begins to reveal something else, not that which is pure and holy and good in the respect of this is the way we want to live our life. If it did, Jesus wouldn't be necessary. For if righteousness came through the law, then Christ died in vain. That's not the point. For what the law could not do, it says in Romans, Christ came. So let's not glorify the law a little too much here. As a matter of fact, if you go even further, in the Gospel of John, the first chapter, matter of fact, I'm going to change pace a little bit, go over to John 1 for a minute. We may have mentioned it yesterday, but I think it may bear repeating right now. What's going on here? Where are you? Thank you. Right. In John 1, verse 16, it says, and of his fullness we have all received, and grace for grace. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. That's the King James version of it. I just want to read it out of the ESV for a second, just for the sake of contrast, because there is a little contrasting point there. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is by the Father's side, or at the Father's side. So it's an interesting verse, but the thing is this, what is John telling us? John is really bringing something to light here. Grace and truth came through Jesus. Grace and truth did not come through Moses. Didn't. The law came through Moses, which is, another way you could say it, death came through Moses. Moses is what the revelation of death is like and how death works. It was necessary, but that's what it was. Grace and truth comes through Jesus. And then John adds something that's quite frightening. No one has seen God at any time. Which means Elijah, Moses, and all the other guys never saw the fullness of God. Snippets only. Why am I saying that? Because when I go back to Luke 19 and sharing with you to seek and to save that which is lost, what was lost was knowing not only who we are, but emanating who we are. Emanating the living, infinite God is who you are. Your design is batsalemnu katnutmu. Image and likeness, that's who you are. You always have been, you always will be. You never lost it, we only denied it. What? Yeah. Once again, for those of you who maybe weren't here over the weekend, if you've heard me preach before, 9 times out of 10, especially when I'm visiting places, I will always come back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, where the serpent says to the woman, hasn't God said that you should eat all the trees of the garden? No, he said we can eat of all the trees except for this one. The serpent says, oh, really? How's that? And he goes, well, if we eat this one, we're going to die. The serpent says, you're not going to die. For God knows that if you eat of this tree, you will be like God, and you will know good and evil. Oh, really? Yeah, you will be like God. Actually, you will be like God knowing good and evil. See, because up at this time, they didn't know good and evil. They didn't live a life from knowing good and evil, which is exactly how God wants us to live, not knowing good and evil. You see, if the command back then was, don't eat of that, he's still telling us, quit eating of that. That's hard, because most of our structure is always based on, even as I'm speaking, it's like, well, is his doctrine right or is it wrong? Still that tree. Does it fit into my peg holes that I have, or, do I have to file it down a little bit to make it fit? Think it through for a minute. So when the serpent says that, which is the powerful or difficult part of this, is that she was already the image and likeness of God. But he was creating something in her that didn't exist before. A desire for something more. The thing is, this desire for something more, when you already have all you'll ever need, and the source is infinite, it really sets us off the path. What it does is tell us, come on, woman. The guy standing right next to her. Come on, Adam. You're not really like God enough until you eat this. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm created to be in his image and likeness, so surely I guess I must need that. And the second we say that, we've just said, well, I guess I'm not like God enough without that. And he tacks on to it the knowing of good and evil, which is what the law is all built on. The knowing of good and evil, what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil, what is pain versus pleasure, all those things. By knowing those things, that's what's going to make me like God. And it sends us into a cyclical situation where we're constantly, in a sense, chasing our own tail. Because you'll never know enough good and you'll never know enough evil. You constantly go around this circle thinking that, and it's a sliding scale. Have you ever heard my example of the lion and the antelope? Yeah? Oh, I wasn't sure. You went like that. You're just agreeing. Praise the Lord. Thank you, Father. Amen. It's good. Thank you. So, but it kind of goes like this. The way the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's this ridiculous sliding scale all the time and in everywhere. And it goes like this. So this is antelopes out in the field, they're grazing, and then you have the lionesses, because how many of you know the lioness do the hunting, the males just sit around waiting for food to show up. Some things never change. So they're out hunting, and all of a sudden the antelope realizes it hears something in the brush. So it stops, it looks up. As soon as the lioness realizes they've been found out, they then spring forth and they go chasing the antelope, and there's that chase scene. And of course, there's a little slow one that kind of falls back a little bit, and that's the one that gets grabbed by the lioness. She pulls him down. A couple of other lions grab it, maybe grab it by the neck. And if you can hear in English all the roaring and bleating and sounds that are going on in the neighing or whatever sounds antelope make, they would translate like this. Antelope says, "Oh, dear God, I can't believe it. Satan has attacked me. The lion is roaring. It's clawing at my flesh. I'm going to die. Deliver me from the hands of the wicked one." But then if you heard the lioness, it'll be, "Thank you, Lord, for this food. We've been waiting all day. We are so grateful for what you've given us." Now, maybe that's a funny way of handling it, but at the same time, it makes the point, and this is what we do in our lives, and we chase ourselves with this. And it's constantly going, am I right? Am I wrong? Is this good? Is this right? I don't want to be out of God's will. Am I in God? All these things that we do to ourselves, and it's this constant running like a hamster on a treadmill or on those wheels. And if you ever watch them, sometimes their foot gets caught, and then they start flipping in the wheel. Haven't we done that? Jesus went right for the man's identity. He said basically, interestingly enough, "Hey, Zacchaeus, get out of the tree." Get out of the tree. We're having dinner tonight at your place. So he's going to now seeking to save that which was destroyed, because what was destroyed is when we thought we had to desire something more than who we already were. We stopped blaming the devil. We decided. I'm sure the temptation was there, but so what? We decided that we would give up who we were to try to find something more. It's so simple. We have a lady in our church that says, the gospel after a while is so simple it's almost stupid. There's a truth to it. If not, how could a little child lead them? But it's so simple. Men and women of God, you are like God enough. Period. You are like God enough. And ultimately, the cross and the resurrection, one of the aspects of it was the proving hands down that there is no excuse you can have to believe otherwise. Well, what if I'm a sinner? Cross. Well, what if I'm not good enough? Cross. What about my life, the way I live? Resurrection, new life. There's no excuse. You are the image and likeness of God. But here's the catch. You can't do it egoistically. That would still be the serpent. So what is I am like God about? The I am is this. See, now it's not I am like God. It's we. Because I am we. And we is he. And he is we. And we are me. That they may be one. The thing is as this progresses, and this is another part of this, I felt earlier I wanted to dip into to bring this a bit more practical. Because now it's about this identity issue. This Zacchaeus is a pure one. He is a son of Abraham who's in covenant with a Melchizedekian priest that doesn't operate by rules and laws and blood sacrifices. Matter of fact, it's the Melchizedekian priest that's technically sacrificed by the Aaronic priest. If Christ is the lamb and he's the high priest Melchizedekian-wise, then it's Aaron that destroyed him. Well, not really Aaron, it was Caiaphas, technically, that made the pronouncement. So understand the Levitical and Melchizedekian priest concept is at odds with each other. Okay? The thing is that their odds are this. Levi, that priesthood, by the way, Levi, hear the word Levi, if I was to finish it into another word, guess what that word is? Leviathan. Leviathan. Okay? The wreathed serpent. Which is another interesting analogy, because if you've ever seen the wreathed serpent, one of the pictures, in Greek it's known as Osporos, if I said the name right. It's the serpent that swallows its tail, looks like a ring. Have you seen that? You ever seen maybe that depicted somewhere? What's interesting about that serpent that swallows its tail is that's another element of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We're constantly in this cyclical situation where it's right if it's wrong, it's right if it's wrong, it's right if it's wrong. Okay, this is right. Now I feel good. Then all of a sudden you hear something else. Oh no, maybe I was wrong. Now this is right. And then we go over here, and well, maybe that's wrong. And this is right. Red light, green light. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Open veil, closed veil, open veil, closed veil, open veil, closed veil. Look at God, don't look God. Look at God, don't look God. I'm good enough. Not I'm not. Yes I am. No I'm not. All this goes on and on. And the whole time, if you can imagine Christ beyond the veil is a way of saying it. If you can imagine that, and we're opening and closing, opening and closing, opening and closing, don't you think the onlooker would have kind of a crazy view of who this Christ is? Because ultimately, with this religion we have, whatever you want to call it, unfortunately, in certain respects, the Pharisees, the Levites, the Aaronic priesthood, Moses, and all I said is really getting a bum rap, as we would say in English, American English. I don't know if it equals this. Hope it doesn't. I ain't like cuss at you or something in British English. I've done that a couple of times. People, what did he just say? Okay, but it's the issue of, when you think about it, our religiousness today. What about the inner Pharisee in our life? We talk about an inner child. What about our inner Pharisee? What about what we do to the revelation of the Christ within us? Because ultimately, what's destroyed? Because that word Zacchaeus, it's pure. And I remember I mentioned transparent. Did I say that or not? I don't remember if I did, but it's also the same word for transparent. One of the amazing things about transparency, especially when it comes to a lamp, is when the lamp is transparent in that respect, you see the light shining on the inside. You see, but when I put my candle under a bushel, or under something to cover it where you can't see it, under a basket, as Jesus talks about in the Beatitudes, when he talks about, when I do that, I basically snuff out the light. So really, what Jesus came to seek and to save, what was destroyed or lost, was his image in you. That's it, his image in you. Now, on a practical level, how does that work out? Because it's interesting, Jesus ends this discussion, if you will, but then he goes into this. As they heard these things, he proceeded to tell a parable because it was near Jerusalem and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. And he said, therefore, a nobleman went out to a far country to receive himself a kingdom and then return. Calling 10 of his servants, he gave them 10 minhas and said to them, engage in business until I come. King James, I think, says, occupy till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we don't want this man to reign over us. And when he returned, having received the kingdom, he ordered these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know what they had gained doing business. And you know probably this story very well if you've been around for a while. It's the parable of the talents. But the short version would go like this. The first came before him saying, Lord, your mina has made 10 minas more. And he said to him, well done, you good and faithful servant. Because you've been faithful over little, have authority over 10 cities. The second came saying, Lord, your mina has made 5 minas. And he said to him, and you are to be over 5 cities. And another came saying, Lord, here's your mina. I kept it laid away in a handkerchief, for I was afraid of you, because you're a severe man. You take what you did not deposit and reap what you do not sow. And he said to him, I don't know why it says the word condemn, but that's fine. It's actually, I will bring a judgment. I will bring a judgment to you with your own words, you wicked servant. I don't know why it says wicked, but that's another story. You knew that I was a severe man, taking what I did not deposit. And then he says, why then did you not at least put the money in the bank, and at my coming I might have collected it with interest? Take the minute from him and give it to the guy with 10. So real quick on this. There's some Hebraic symbologies here that are important. The number 10 is a very important number in Hebrew. The number 10 is the Hebrew letter Yud. It kind of looks like an apostrophe. It's the only Hebrew letter that is suspended above the line. And the Yud, if I were to close my hand like this, and you close yours and look at it, you will see a Yud right here. And the purpose of that is, the closed hand is unrealized potential. It's also known as the infinite point where all creation began. So you might say, when God said, light be, if that's for us when creation began, it would be the point where the light would be sourced and emanating from. Another way, several rabbis would call it the infinite point where creation began. That makes sense. Another aspect about the Yud, that 10 with all that meaning, it's the first letter in Yahweh, which is an imperfect tense verb, which means existing. It's the simplest, there are other things we can break down with it, it's great, but in the simplest form, it means existing. It's also the first name in Yeshua, Jesus. The first letter in Yeshua, Jesus, which means delivering or liberating, freeing. The other aspect of this interesting number 10 is that the Bible opens with 10 statements of creation in the book of Genesis, the first chapter. Not too long after that, we meet this guy named Abraham, and he has 10 trials. Then, of course, as you move on, you see 10 commandments, 10 plagues, etc. This number 10 becomes a very significant thing. But the key thing is, first of all, it's either the 10 statements of creation, so we'll call the 10, this is even when it comes to tithing. The issue about the tithe, it's not about getting your calculator out and deciding, well, let me see, I made $100 this week, so $10. Can we make it 9, God? No, that's not what we're talking about. But the reason for the tithe or the tenth is, again, tapping into the notion of the creative power of God. And what the tithe can do to us too, I think, to me, when we start calculating our tithe, get out, well, I made this much in there. And I don't think beyond it. It's no longer the creative power of God. Now it's become a trial to me and challenging my ego. As a side note to that, what I find interesting about there's a wonderful book. You may be interested in it if you like Jewish study. It's called The Jewish Phenomenon by Stephen Silbiger. And it's basically a record of all the success of Jewish people financially, particularly, and on the back of the book alone, it kind of blows you away that, like, for example, the Jewish people only make up 2% of the American population. But over 40% are on the Fortune 400, most financially wealthy. And he goes into why that is. And one of the things he says in the book, now Stephen Silbiger, this is not a religious book, it's a book on business. Stephen Silbiger was the guy who founded the Home Shopping Network. Remember all those home shopping network things? Well, this is the guy that started it all. And he goes through about the wealth of this people and how they have this mind that creates wealth. And the thing that was interesting about him was what he was saying. At one point he says, and I was shocked. He says, Jews don't believe in tithing. Bible says. Malachi says. And he said, no, they don't. Jews believe in getting the job done. Whatever our synagogue needs, we don't think about if I put in 10%. We look at the issue and say, are we going to get this job done or what? 9 times out of 10, it's going to cost us way more than our tithe. But we're about getting the job done. Maybe we need a bit of that type of attitude in our own congregations, Let's get the job done. Let's get the job done. Well, what if it costs? Duh. Of course it costs. Another thing he says in the book, maybe you heard this too, he says, Jews don't believe in a covenant. They do not believe in the statement, I have a covenant with God. What? Matter of fact, this is even in the introduction. You can't get past the introduction without that. What do you mean, Jews don't? How many times we see all types of covenant acts that take place throughout the Old Testament? But he's clear. He says, a Jew doesn't believe I have a covenant with God. He believes God has a covenant with the tribe, and for me to access that, I have to be part of the group. So think about that. Let's get the job done, and we're going to have to do it by being part of the group. We can't do it on our own. Wow. Which now brings us back to the 10 here, the creative power of God. We have a situation where, of course, the parable in one respect is not really, it is and isn't referring to Jesus, typical rabbinical thing. It is and is not, yes and no, that kind of thing. How many times people have said, well, can you answer this question? I'll say, I'll give you a good rabbinical answer, yes and no. You pick it. But what is he talking about here? So we have the issue of he's left to go get a kingdom, and then he's coming back. And he's now talking about the people who, not the one he went to get the kingdom with, but the one he's left in charge. And it's interesting, he says 10 servants and 10 minhas. Now a minha is another word that wrongly gets translated in the Old Testament several times as a sacrifice. A minha is not a sacrifice. A mitzbiach is a sacrifice in Hebrew. And for example, when Cain and Abel came before the Lord, somehow or another we kind of distort this picture that it was all about this lamb and the sacrifice and stuff. There was no blood sacrifice there. It was a minha, which is a gift with no bloodshed. Even Strong's Concordance, dear Lord, says no bloodshed. There was no blood that was shed. There was no it was a gift that was offered. And I'm not going to get tied into the Cain and Abel story, but just to make a point, it was about offering gifts. It's about giving something of value that I have to another person. Let me say that again. A minha is about me giving something of value I have to another person. But it's the number 10. So now we're talking about the identifier of that creative power of God, the life of God, the awesomeness of God, that force of God. And again, like with Adam, God, remember it says, talk about God created animals and let Adam name it. If you really look through that, what he's saying here is there's this creative force of God, and we get to identify and give definition to it. God has given you this amazing force of life, and you get to define it. So now we're talking, what is this 10? It's about his identity, this gift he has given us. Now, how are we, and it's interesting, it's not that, okay, now I need to go out and do something, although yes, I do believe the life of God will motivate us to do things. Okay, but the last guy says he wrapped it in a napkin. That's what it said, right? What's interesting about the wrapping it with a napkin, let me see here, I just want to make sure I pronounce the word right for you, not that I don't know if that's going to be much of an issue to you, but oh, come on. Where are you? 21. Sudero is the word. And I'm being specific because it's not just a cloth. It was a cloth that was wrapped around the head of one who was buried. So he's saying, you've given me, because it's on the heels of what just happened with Zacchaeus. You've given me this amazing identity, this amazing, limitless life revelation of image and likeness of God. You've given this to me, and I wrapped it in a death cloth. I didn't let it produce. I didn't let it emanate from me. So, could God be asking us at All Nations Church, I've given you an identity. I've given you a force of life. The first guy, there's three, right? The first guy, he produces 10. It was kind of crazy because he had 10 servants, 10 minhas, and there's only 3 guys that are talked to. What's the number 3? Another thing about image and likeness, right? The Trinity, the life of God, those aspects. I mean, this parable is on the surface, it looks nice, but it really is honing into something. The first guy produces a 10. In other words, he's produced likeness. The second guy didn't reach likeness, but he did hit the number 5. What's the number 5 in biblical numerology? Anybody know? Grace, that's right. Yeah, he may not have been totally irreverent, but he was living by grace. The other guy, you might say, which he was speaking to in the Zacchaeus story, let's say the religious guy. Rather than revealing the identity and manifestation of likeness, he wraps it in a burial cloth, and that's where he keeps it. So what about All Nations Church? What about those of you who are maybe friends of All Nations Church? Or maybe you kind of, some of us are, well, I don't know if I'll just, back and forth we go. Let's take this further. First of all, the question is, after you hopefully realize, maybe if there's nothing you get out of tonight, get this. You are like God enough. Start there. You are like God enough. Anything else, remember, Jesus crucified in the place of the skull, Golgotha. Crucify this knowledge thing. And let this begin to dictate to that. I mean, I used to preach that backwards. I used to say, oh, well, you need to get head knowledge down into heart knowledge. Are you kidding me? The other way around. Don't destroy what's down in the heart, because that's what you're doing. Release what's in the heart to affect how you think. Because all this is about the emanation of the heart issue, not the head issue. And it's very easy to get tangled between the two, which is why both those trees were in the center of the garden. It wasn't like one was at one end and the other one was at the other. These are very close proximity. The issue is where we're going to live from. What are we going to emanate from? Life or the knowledge of good and evil, death? Pick one. The catch is even in picking one, you can't escape the fact that the root is life. That's who you are, that's what you got. I may wrap it in a burial cloth, but ultimately, had it. I was just testing to see if Jeff knew how to use the microphone. He passed the test. We'll keep him for another week. So first of all, we're all like God enough. Now it's an issue of me emanating that. But remember, I told you the catch-22 to that is it's not a me, it's a we. And each we has an expression. This is the we expression we've titled All Nations Church. And it's not easy sometimes being a part of a we. Because whenever we're a part of a we, if my egoistic serpent rises, I don't want to be part of the we no more. I just want to be me, as the song goes. I just want to be me. I don't know that I want to be part of the we, unless being part of the we is convenient. But when I've done that, what am I doing to image and likeness? Even Stephen Silbigger would tell you, you got to be part of the tribe. Not in just theological correctness, but in mutual expression. But think that through. Think of it for a minute then. The identity is a we. And I realize not everybody identifies with that, and that's okay. They may have to identify somewhere else. I'm good with that. The catch is, though, I've also learned over time that many times the resistance factor of really being part of the collective, because you can't escape it. There's no such thing as being in this by yourself, period. Just not going to happen. Jesus didn't say, when two or more are gathered together, I really don't care. I may show up or not, because I'm good with one. That's not what he said. He said, when two or more are gathered together, there I am in the midst. And I am more convinced than ever before that our culture and society need a revelation of Jesus. And that's not going to happen unless there's a we. So now I'm part of a we. And the thing that strikes us is there are those times where, well, heck, I pastored for 35 years. I'll tell you right now, there are times I didn't want to get out of bed on Sunday morning and face the people. It wasn't fun. But as one rabbi that I studied with for a couple of years, he used to say this. Rather than thinking, because you know how we do, if you get the flat tire on the way to church, the devil attacked me. Or something else happened, well, must have been the devil. You know, I turned off the microphone a minute. Well, that devil wanted to silence what I was saying. We do that stuff. He said, you need to think differently. When you feel those feelings, well, most of the time it's egoistic. I mean, we have to give permission to the Holy Spirit to speak to us to do something sometimes. Maybe you're on the way to church and the Holy Spirit beckons you to go this way instead of that way. A, you may avoid an accident. B, you may wind up here and there's somebody you need to minister to and you wind up not getting to church at all. I'm good with that. Sorry, Pastor. I'm good with that as an exception to the rule. Not that we obey rules, but you understand what I mean. But he said this. He said, you know what? What's the goal? What's the goal here? The goal is to emanate the life of God. Then anything, when it starts to hinder you, rather than saying it's the devil, which it may be, your ego, trying to prevent you, but think of it this way. How about changing it into a question? How bad do I want to accomplish the goal? How bad do I want to accomplish the goal? How bad do I want to get to that manifestation that I know I'm designed for? How badly do I want to uncover? Get it out of the wrap, uncover it. See, because I don't believe that I'm trying to attain godlikeness. What I'm trying to do is uncover godlikeness in my life. I'm trying to be a revelation of it, not trying to attain it. If I'm constantly trying to attain it, I'm still living under the power of that tree that's telling me I'm not. Everybody in this room is like God enough. And to be honest with you, you go out the door, you're going to see some Muslims out there, you're going to see some Buddhists out there, some atheists, and all of them are like God enough. All we need to do is help awaken them to that, but we can't awaken them to that unless it's really awakened in us. If not, we're just going to sell them another religion. It'll be a war over words. Or books. My book's better than your book. You know. Had a friend, there was a kind of a conservative buzz in America, or particularly in California for a little bit, where it's not really true, but they were citing some legislation that was going through the state of California, which I start reading the legislation. I don't get my news from the news all the time. That can be dangerous, at least in America. I don't know about here. Maybe the BBC is better than some of our conservative news in America. But anyway, so they were off hollering about if this legislation passes, the result could be they'll be banning Bibles in California. See what those liberals are doing. Well, I led the legislation. No, that's not what it was saying. It's a whole different topic. But the thing that was interesting, a pastor friend of mine said, you know, if that passes and that's the result, that could be the best thing that ever happened to us. Not that I don't love my Bible. Obviously, I've used it tonight. And in 2 languages. But, you know, for 300 years, the church didn't have a canonized New Testament. What did it do? You know what the church's emphasis was the first 300 years? Well, they loved reading the epistles when they could get their hands on it. And they even read the Old Testament through New Testament eyes. Fantastic. Let's do it. But you know what they had? Each other. And with the backdrop of persecution, having each other becomes really important. And somehow or another, the church survived 300 years without a, gold leaf, leather-bound Bible. Now, of course, we have our tablets. I guess my point is, what is this expression all about? What is it all nations about? What are you about in it? Please take it seriously. Are you talking about Bonnie having to cook us more food? You cooking again tonight? Plenty on the table. Are you working in the morning? Yeah. Father. Please, Pastor Jeff, take the microphone away from him so I can go home and go to sleep. Are you working in the coffee shop or you're working somewhere else in the morning? Man, he's a slave driver. See what you mean? He makes you work somewhere else too. No. Love you. And laughter is good. It helps ease the surgical knife when it goes in. And the knife is this. This is a we. This is about us uncovering the identity of God, whatever that is called in All Nations Church. He's entrusted something to us. And it's not easy. The guy that produced 10 wasn't easy. The guy that produced 5 wasn't easy. The guy that only did the 1, that was easy. Because the guy that did the 1 didn't really do anything but cater to what he felt was he had his picture of who his Lord was there, the Nestor man. He had all this picture. The other guys, irrespective of what that may have been, and mind you, Jesus said, I'm judging you by your words, which is something he does, by the way. He doesn't judge outside of anything but you, which is really scary. Well, isn't he going to judge by the 10 Commandments? No. Those have been destroyed, knocked up on the cross. Those are useless. Matter of fact, all 613 of them, if you want to get technical, and the Jewish law. Jesus instituted something really scary. He said, judge not lest you be judged, for what measure you use, we measure to you. I don't know about you, but he said, you set the criteria. I'd rather God judge me over those 613 than me judge me by my criteria. Thus he turns around and says, but the merciful will obtain mercy. Hint. Hint. So this is a we. All Nations Church is a we. You've been given each and collectively a deposit of his identity, of his expression, of his face, if you will, in this community. And he's looking for us, saying to us, would you let it grow? Would you unveil it to the community? Would you unveil it to one another? And yes, there are times it's going to be really hard. And the issue is not going to be, look what the devil did, or that kind of stuff. How about instead us asking ourselves, how bad do I want that goal? The goal of a revelation and emanation of Christ. Is people going to be perfect? No. Yeah, and I know how this goes. I've been a pastor 35 years. It usually goes like this. When it all works well, yay, look what we did as a church. When it doesn't work well, something wrong with the pastor. If you're over a group of people, and I understand we do make mistakes. I've made mistakes in church with people. Matter of fact, to be honest with you, I'd made one that was pretty severe one year. And it took me a few years later to figure out what really happened. And how, in a sense, I was maneuvered into a situation where I hurt somebody's feelings thinking I was helping this other situation. Well, in the end game, I didn't help that situation. It still fell apart. But I was now so engrossed taking care of this. So I was winding up with talking to this fellow. So finally what I did, I called him. And, I just sat down with him. And I told him flat out what happened. I told him how wrong I was. And it wasn't that he came back to the church or anything. First, it was about clearing my own heart. But I really let him know. But the one thing that happened to him is it really liberated him. He was already now in another church, and I wasn't going to try to change that. But, yeah, we do. We make mistakes. But the other issue is, how bad do you want the goal? Can the goal of all nations be bigger than any one person's mistake? Can the goal of all nations be bigger than if Bonnie doesn't cook well one day? Which I don't think is possible. Is all nations' goal bigger than the pastor? So he can make a mistake and we can still reach the goal. Now, granted, he needs to make a little less, maybe. We'll talk to him about that. But all kidding aside, though, what is it? What is the goal here? And before you get technical with, the vision statement is all nations, and then we got this statement, and we got that company. What is the goal? What is the ultimate goal? Is an expression of Jesus. If it expresses itself through a coffee shop, if it expresses itself through a type of worship service, if it expresses it through a soup kitchen, if it expresses itself through helping the homeless, however it is, and it may not be all of those or none of those. The point is, though, is where does that expression go? And how intense is it for us to attain the goal? Not the doing of, let's say, the coffee shop, or doing of the soup kitchen, or doing, I say coffee shop because it's just sitting in it. It's the first time I sat in it, by the way, officially. But Bonnie wasn't there to make me coffee and make it something nice. I'll get over it. I did take some of that, though. I went into the coffee shop, so it was close. So it's kind of fresh in my mind looking at it, because I think it was last year or the year before last when I saw it before it was done. So it was kind of cool to sit in there. But my point is, though, it's not about the doing, but the emanating. Because in the end game, we can always get somebody to do. Nursery, we can get somebody to do, but is being in the nursery emanating the Christ to help move forward the goal? Well, maybe I'm sounding a bit redundant now. But it's only because it's a very simplistic, but yet in certain respects, it's hard to get through our minds how this is. Because in one respect, what winds up happening is we start filtering it through what we already know. And we start filtering it through what we already think we desire. And we start filtering it through, and some of those things, perfect, if they're emanating the Christ. But one thing I do know for sure, and it's something I've shared before here, but I'll say it again. I put it in my first Melchizedek book, and that's this. Religion occupies the space where revelation doesn't exist. And wherever our unveiled aspect of Christ has its limit, it's safer to say, you know what, I'm clueless. Rather than many times when we don't even realize we're doing it, because the one beautiful thing about the serpent, it always makes sure that we have an answer. And usually there's a list of beliefs. Well, this is what I believe. So what? Well, what about what God believes? God doesn't live in the realm of belief as much as he lives in the realm of unveiled light. Understand what I'm saying? It's not about belief now. It's about what we perceive. What are we perceiving here? Because it's interesting, the way we use the word belief in English today is very different than the way they used it in Jesus' day and in the language then. Belief was always the result of seeing something. You know, it said Abraham believed God, right? Do you realize it was after he heard? It was after he encountered God. It wasn't before. But most of the time what we're telling people to do is believe before they encounter. Isn't that true? Oh, you know, if you just believe God, it'll work. When Abraham believed after it worked. See, it's a different picture. See, Abraham caught a glimpse of something. He saw something. And that's what I want to encourage you to do tonight. Yes, I'm finally going to quit, Bonnie. It's okay. Okay? What I want you to do is realize God has entrusted you with the most precious gift you could ever have, which is the emanation of himself. He's given you the best. But he's so huge, if you will, so infinite. It can't be just me. It has to be we. Has to be we. And as uncomfortable as that is, because it is uncomfortable, which is good, very good. Because wherever you start feeling, one person said to me, well, how do you know where the ego begins and ends? Wherever you're uncomfortable. Whenever you start feeling the discomfort, you're meeting the serpent within you. How many times that thing just coils around us and starts to squeeze. I can't be like God enough. I'm not good enough. I don't want to be part of that group. I don't feel loved by them. Well, how much do you love them? Well, not very much because I don't feel loved by them. Well, what's the point? It's not about whether I'm always feeling loved by you. It's about whether or not you're feeling loved by me. And you know what? What love doesn't care anymore if you love me enough. What's more important is, do I love you enough? Make sense? All right, I better stop. Take what you have, men and women of God. I do know some, very few, but some things. I know, and not just this church. I was in another church this morning, and our church back home. A lot of folks that are starting to break new ground in discovering what God is doing now and in the near future, if you will, where he's trying to go. It creates some ruckus, I guess would be the word, amongst us. Because first of all, we don't like change. And we also don't like the fact that our ego is going to be challenged. But the only way the unveiling happens is if we let go of the ego. Only. Cannot happen with the ego in concert with us. The thing is, do we know where that begins and ends? I said the ego begins where you feel uncomfortable. It can. It can. But let me tell you where the image begins. First of all, you're going to have to lay aside the ego to see it. But when you see it, it changes everything. Because now you believe because you saw. And the belief you now have comes from a rooted place, down deep within you, that says, this is who we are. And even though we may have struggling with each other, I'm still more about who we are than I am about the struggle. Okay, I'll shut up, Pastor. It's yours.